been scrolling through these directories for a week, opening files, reading them. There's no end to what some people have saved.
There are obvious gaps where a few potentially embarrassing letters to dealers have been erased from memory.
What do you mean their records are underwater? What water?
It's 45 minutes past the hour. In business news, JPT Corporation's announced acquisition of Essex Limited is on hold, pending approval by the Department of Justice. Federal attorneys said they will, quote, study the documentation to be submitted by the company to determine whether the $50 million acquisition may violate antitrust laws. JPT expressed confidence they will fully satisfy the government requirements within the 30-day deadline.
I can't believe the records the Antitrust Division wants to see.
Well, this kind of review always comes down to records. And the question, can we produce every document we need to support our case?
Let's get moving on it now. Our entire division is on the line.
Oh, right, and we have, what, 30 days to put all of this together?
30 days, 22 working days to come up with all the documentation.
I think Saturday and Sunday just became working days.
Right.
The way you handle records and information is constantly being put to the test. Whether it's retrieving a single document for a coworker or producing a roomful of documents demanded in a legal case. At JPT, the team who met that day included George Adams, Senior Vice President for Business Development, Barbara Dowling, Associate General Counsel for Mergers and Acquisitions, Ken Barton, Corporate Records and Information Manager, and Sam Chase, Manager of Information Systems.
What happens with the Department of Justice if we hit a snag?
Justice files an injunction. They'll interrogate all your key people, look at all your records, conduct depositions, question customers and competitors. You'll face months of delay, legal costs into the millions. And at the end of all that, the possibility of a suit in federal court blocking the deal.
At which point the deal would not look so good, and neither would our division.
Well, the records management policy was designed to do the job, and I'm sure it will, even though this is the first time that this division has been put to a test like this.
The procedures we put in place should be able to handle it.
As long as everybody has been doing what they're supposed to do.
Let's hope they have. Now, can we run through the documents list and talk about who's going to do what and set some target dates?
The document search activated procedures that had been planned for just such a situation. The company had brought together the management of records and information and data systems in its updated records handling policy. The plan was designed to solve problems and deliver important benefits. Make records readily accessible. Protect the safety and integrity of documents and data. Eliminate paper and electronic clutter. Reduce storage costs and free up memory capacity. And ensure compliance with legal and statutory requirements. The policy made each employee responsible for meeting professional record standards. All records on paper, electronic, or other storage media must be retained according to the organization-wide records management policy, organized in a logical, intelligible, and systematic manner, and reviewed at assigned dates for destruction, erasure, or continued retention. The policy covered 4 primary issues that apply to everyone: ease of retrieval, consistency of retention, thoroughness of records reduction, and dependability of recovery from a records disaster. As documents were collected in the Law Department conference room, many problems surfaced in all 4 of these areas. Nearly out of time, the Associate General Counsel called a last-ditch late-night meeting.
We have another 24 hours before we have to respond to the Department of Justice.
How could this happen?
With all the planning and training this division has had,
We should have been able to pull these records out with no problem. I don't know what the matter
You
is.
said it yourself when the document request first came. No problem if everybody's been doing what they're supposed to do.
Which they haven't been in too many areas.
Too many holdouts. Too many people who do things according to habit instead of according to policy.
We have 4 problems that are typical of what's happened here.
Problem number 1 was the inability of several people to locate and retrieve records, like an analyst down in marketing named Ralph. Susan's problem involves records retention. She didn't follow company policy for how it wants its own records kept. Don had a problem with our records reduction goals. He's been saving everything, regardless of the policy, for systematically purging files.
And Karen had problems recovering records after a disaster. Most of her records are a lost cause.
Ralph had been asked to give us some market studies. Apparently, he had several different versions. Couldn't identify the final one. So I'm wondering, what's wrong with this guy's computer files? Well, as soon as I walked into his office and saw how he handled paper, I had a pretty good idea what his computer hang-ups were.
I like everything spread out where I can see it. If I put something away, I'll probably forget to do it. There is a method to all these piles. See, each pile is a project, and, think of this as like a stovetop. Hot projects like these, they go on the front burner. If things can cook a little slower, I just move them on up to the back burner, and that gives me an opportunity to move something more urgent up front. And stuff like reference material, projects on hold, they all go on the sideboard. And when a project's all done, all the leftovers go in the refrigerator. Well, I make a mess when I cook in my kitchen, too.
Of course, there was no document order within these piles. Chronological, alphabetical, topical, they were stacked according to whatever he had handled most recently. With no file system, having everything where he could see it meant having nothing where he could find it. A good example of how hopeless it was happened when Ralph phoned in from out of town to try to talk someone else through a search for a report we needed.
Where should I look?
Find the report with the back burner stuff. Back of the desk,
burner?
left corner, I think. No, wait, I had to use that report for the sales meeting, so I moved it to the front burner.
Front burner.
Just last week, so it should be near the top.
There's a note here. Ralph, I took your report, needed it for the board meeting. Eddie.
Report's gone. I never noticed. But at least we know where it is. Now all we have to do is locate the other versions.
Where do you want me to look?
He didn't even know it was gone. In fact, that was another problem. Ralph's stovetop was open to anyone who stepped into the office when he was out. It was a serious security risk.
So what about his records on computer?
His electronic files are organized just like his paper ones, in heaps.
I have a few simple directories. That way I can't lose anything.
Turned out he couldn't find anything either. Each directory listed hundreds of files in an endless scroll of 8-character code names. No subdirectories, no file structure, no document summaries. Ralph had to open and read every file to identify it.
I'll find everything, eventually.
The point to record management is to have information and documents retrievable now, not eventually. And that requires systematized file management, not personal filing gimmicks.
The same records management principles apply to paper and electronic files. File in an orderly and systematic fashion. Eliminate working versions and drafts when a final version is complete. Move records to departmental or centralized files when you're through using them. Refile current working papers to clear your workspace. And prevent unauthorized access to sensitive information by locking files and following computer security guidelines.
Now look at this. How do we explain what will look to federal attorneys like a cover-up? Selected gaps in dealer correspondence.
That correspondence was handled by someone here who does everything by the book. Unfortunately, it's her book, not ours. Like a few other people, Susan sees everything that passes through her hands as hers. Susan's records simply do not follow the company-wide document retention plan.
They're my records. It's my office. This is the way I like to live. No clutter, no mess, no papers. Where most people have a filing cabinet, I have a shredder and a scanner. The minute a piece of paper comes into this office, it's dealt with and it's passed along. Or it's scanned into memory and then it's shredded. Just like I delete files from my hard drive, I don't like clutter there either. And when I find a document that says something that I don't think should stay in the company records, I make a special point of destroying that. For example, last year we had this dealer from Pittsburgh who was terminated. He wrote a sour grapes letter accusing us of trying to drive him out of the business, of trying to create a monopoly and controlling resale prices. Well, I didn't think the company wanted the antitrust division poking their noses into that, so I shredded his letter and I erased my response.
The problem is the letters were removed selectively and not according to any schedule for document destruction. That becomes apparent when the selectively purged documents then show up in someone else's file.
And they will show up, because documents have more lives than a cat. Deleted files can be undeleted. Even erased and shredded files may live on in PC and LAN backups, in coworkers' files, even in files outside the company.
When documents like these show up in someone else's file and they're not in yours, it looks like you're trying to destroy evidence of something you did wrong. Now, what Susan should have done is eliminated entire categories of files, following the normal course of scheduled document destruction. If this case ever ends up in litigation, those gaps may very well have to be defended.
I save as few documents as possible to the network. Whatever I need for my work is on my laptop or my home computer. I back up files that I think are important on disk, and I keep the duplicate copies at home. That way I control how my records are managed.
In other words, Susan has taken some of the backup function away from the LAN. She's elected her home as a kind of off-site storage facility for company records she happens to be responsible for, a breach of security. And records under her control may not be readily available for use by someone else in the company with a legitimate need to know. She seems to assume she will always be in the same job in the same place. But what happens if she moves along? How will anybody use her records?
You know, there's also a problem with her use of scanning and OCR technology on records that might figure in legal matters. She may be cutting back on the paper clutter, but she really ought to follow some guidelines or check with someone. In some cases, electronic records are not acceptable as legal documents in court.
Handle all records as valuable assets belonging to the organization. Save or purge records consistently according to document retention guidelines. Make sure records are usable by others with a legitimate need to know. Treat computer systems as organization-owned facilities to be used in compliance with organization policies. And update documents on PCs, laptops, servers, and backups so that all files match.
Now, what about this mountain of material? Now, 2 lawyers and 2 paralegals have been sifting through this buried treasure for 3 weeks. And what do we have? Extra copies, versions, temporary notes. It's ancient history. Should never have been retained at all, let alone put into long-term storage. Who saved all this stuff?
People like Don here, one of several holdouts on our records reduction policy, which is supposed to reduce the cost, floor space, and computer memory required to store records. Don just can't bear to part with anything. I mean, he saves everything. Every draft of every document he ever wrote or read, and every FYI copy he ever received.
Better to be safe than sorry. If I throw something out, I know that tomorrow morning, that's the thing I'll need. I take a lot of kidding. They call my office the Smithsonian, or the company's attic. But when people need something, they know where they can find it. Right here, somewhere.
Fact is, almost none of what Don stockpiled over the years has ever been really useful to anyone.
You know, I just think it's a good idea to hang on to things, just in case. Like I make a copy of every memo I get. You never know what might come in handy.
Don reviews storage files when they're scheduled for destruction. But he never destroys them. He redates them for longer retention.
I want these stored for another 1-year cycle, just in case.
Just like Ralph, the way Don handles paper crosses over into his electronic record habits. never deletes anything. Saves trial spreadsheets, saves every outline and draft, saves all his email. Now, some email should be moved to an appropriate file and become a business record. But most email is not of lasting value. Not Don. He saves it all. And of course, everything he saves is backed up at the LAN. You've been sorting through all this mess. What's the point? Most of it is redundant, outdated, and irrelevant.
We can't be sure of that. We might run across something that is relevant and potentially damaging.
Especially the email. People treat email like a casual conversation. They think they can say anything that comes into their heads and then delete and it's gone.
But deleted messages may be recoverable.
Look, the point is, an email message on a company computer is not a chat. It's a company document. And if it's saved, it may become a part of company record. You know, if this case turns into a lawsuit, everything here is subject to discovery. Lawyers would fish through all of this stuff. And the sender of some careless language could hear their words read back to them in court. We've got to read it all. We have to be able to spot any potential problems. So we're ready to deal with them.
Cooperate in records reduction to save storage costs and retrieval time. Don't save excess records or extend retention deadlines on a just-in-case basis. Don't save duplicates, transmittals, courtesy copies, informal notes, routine email and memos beyond their active use. Comply with organization-wide retention guidelines when saving or purging files. Index master documents, source documents, and directories to facilitate systematic purge of records. And treat email as organization documents. Write with care and professionalism. Save or erase systematically.
Now, the records requested on this list, what are they? Gone forever?
The department had a business disruption, a records disaster.
We're set up for disaster recovery, aren't we?
Well, not unless everybody follows the disaster recovery plan. For example, Karen, a research coordinator down in product development. We assumed Karen's computer records could be recovered from backups. She's a hard worker, but many of her files and data updates hadn't been backed up or documented for weeks. She explained why, while trying to do 4 other things at once.
Let me know if you need more. It's a matter of priorities. What's more important, running stats or filing stats? Doing the third quarter report or doing lunch? I try to do both, but you can't. Stay late to finish the product study so Fred won't be screaming in the morning? Or stay late to do the day's backups? You know how long it takes to run backups. You have to wait for time on the LAN. You have to select PC files to be transferred for backup. You can't leave your terminal on so the LAN can back up overnight. This is confidential information. You have to check and make sure the backup will run, and you have to document your directories. Hello? I'll call you back. And it's quicker sometimes to save on disks and keep them at your desk. And sometimes you just don't do any of this for a while, and you hope that your luck holds out. Mine didn't.
A month ago, there was a fire. Not big, but it set off sprinklers in Karen's department. There was heat, smoke, and water damage. For 5 days, Karen wasn't allowed to get to her workstation. By that time, everything on top of her desk, her hard drive, directories, and copies on paper, diskettes, were pretty much a total loss. Managers recovered most of our essential records from backups stored off-site. But a surprising amount of the work over the past 2 months simply wasn't there. Backups suddenly achieved higher priorities for Karen and a few others.
Be prepared for disaster recovery. Follow guidelines for labeling and saving records. Document electronic files and make them accessible for systematic backup. Move designated records on paper, electronic, and other media to safe storage away from the work location. And clear your desktop at the end of each day.
Anything more we can do?
before close of business tomorrow?
Unless there's some kind of extension, we're stuck with what we've got, including a few multiple versions, gaps in the records, fire losses, water damage.
Then we'll have to go with what we've got. The clock's run out.
The next day, JPT filed its proposed acquisition of Essex Limited. With many documentation problems unresolved, the acquisition faces challenge by the Justice Department. Investors in the deal have backed off. The Essex board is considering rejecting the offer. The future of JPT's division and several hundred jobs hang in the balance.
We'll get the word from Justice by the end of the week. It doesn't look good. The failure to give them all the records they asked for has opened up questions on many points.
Paying attention to records can't get bypassed in the day-to-day drive to get things done. With all we're doing as an organization, putting product out, meeting profit goals, development goals, getting the job done every day, records matter. That's why we spend money organizing them, why we have a policy for managing them. People have to understand the importance of following that policy. They'll certainly see that not following it has effects that will be felt for years to come.